all the victims, all of them, you know, and you're talking about a lot of them. A lot.
Nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
He told me, if you have a girl baby, I might let you stay around.
Starting off this countdown, we have Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway, otherwise known as the Green River Killer, took the lives of 48 women between 1980 to 1990. But it's believed that his number may be as high as 71 people. He gets his name due to the fact that he would dump the bodies along riverbanks in South King County. In 2001, he was arrested. After his conviction, he did an interview where he talked all about his murders and how he had the desire to kill ever since he was little.
But I took my aggression on, I couldn't take it on my mom, I had to take it on my animals. And
as stated in the interview, he confessed that he started killing at a young age. He had this built-up anger towards his mom, but he couldn't harm her, so he would harm animals instead.
Living things?
Living things, killing animals.
Okay.
Killing animals.
In this interview, he went on to talk more about his victims in detail. Hearing someone confess to murder is just very, very disturbing. In our 9th spot, we have John Hughes. But before I go any further, make sure to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out.
I don't think like normal people, never have. I have racing thoughts, it's been that way since I was a kid. I'm constantly, it doesn't matter if I'm sleeping, if I'm awake, I'm constantly thinking of 100 things at one time.
John Hughes considers himself the Antichrist. He was arrested back in 2008 after killing a trucker at a rest stop along Interstate 29. This dude is intense and incredibly scary. He claims to have killed 15 to 20 people, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. Either way, in this interview for KMBC News, Lara Moretz gets the chance to interview him. And he talks about the people he has taken the lives of, and why he did this.
Rest area, and that was a way for me to gain control, to show, I don't know, I guess assert my dominance, I guess you could say. That'd be the way to put it. And it shut everybody up for a while.
The scariest part of the interview is when Lara asks if he feels bad about killing people. And this was his response.
I don't feel bad about killing anyone.
Not personally, that I've personally done myself, no. I just view things as objects. People, animals, trees, cars, they're just all the same to me.
So no, he feels no remorse. In our 8th spot, we have Jose Martinez.
Explanation because I want to get them. I didn't want the cops to find them. I want to find them myself. We went to this little house. We broke in there and we find one, I shot him.
This dude is one you never want to mess with. And he reveals why during his interview. Basically, Jose was a hitman for a drug cartel. He admitted to killing 3 dozen people as a hitman, and dozens of others just on his own, many of whom were people that just pissed him off. For example, in this interview he talks about one of his brother-in-law's friends. Whenever the friend would visit, he would tell him to park on the side of the road, not on his driveway. He told him this a number of times, yet he still continued to park on the driveway. So what did he do? He asked the guy to take him for a ride in his truck. He then shot him, just to teach him a lesson.
I told him, didn't I tell you not to park in my driveway? And he said he didn't listen to nobody except his mother. Okay.
At number 7, we have James Sweet Jimmy Robinson. Robinson was a former boxer, famous for his bout with Muhammad Ali. His last interview was in Sports Illustrated in 1979. He spoke about his friendship with Ali and that he only weighed 158 pounds for his fight, not 178, as was officially listed. After this interview, he was never seen in the public eye again, and nobody knows what happened to him. Died? Did he start a new life under some new alias? Till this day, nobody knows. ESPN sports writer Wright Thompson had apparently spent 6 years trying to track the guy down, but to no avail. He wrote an article about his attempt in 2009. At our number 6 spot, we have Connie Converse. Now, this one is more positive than a lot of the others on this list, as it's pretty likely that she disappeared on purpose. to start a new life. Connie Converse was an American singer and songwriter active during the 1950s. She disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In 1974, seemingly feeling unfulfilled and struggling with personal and professional dissatisfaction, Converse left her home in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She wrote letters to friends and family explaining her intention to start a new life and pursue a different path. And after packing her belongings into her Volkswagen Beetle, Converse drove away and was never seen again. She left behind no clues about her destination, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Friends, family, investigators, they all attempted to locate her, but they never did. Her music, which was recorded in the 50s and 60s, gained attention long after her disappearance when it was released in the 2000s. Number 5, Lemmy Kilmister. I do not understand how Lemmy lived to the age he did. He died at 70, but considering his lifestyle, that's like a normal person living to 150. Lemmy clearly wasn't in great health in his final interview in 2015 for a German TV station. Kinda crazy that it's been 8 years actually since he died. Feels like 2 years ago to me. He knew he was in bad health in this interview. It's a pretty reflective one. He talks about his past, the lifestyle he led, and how many friends he'd lost over the years. He said, "A lot of my friends are dead. You shouldn't be, but that's the luck of the draw. It's random. You can't plan your life. It doesn't work." He was also asked if he would always continue performing, and he said, "After death, no, I'd have to stop there." He died just over a month after this interview. Next on the list we have Jean Spangler. Jean Spangler was an American actress born in 1923. She appeared in small roles in films like The Petty Girl and The Miracle of the Bells during the 1940s. She was recognized in Hollywood, but not super famous or anything. Her career was still in its infancy when she sadly disappeared. On October 7th, 1949, Spangler left her Los Angeles home, telling her sister-in-law that she was going to meet her ex-husband regarding child support, and then she never returned. The next day, her purse was found in Griffith Park, containing a note that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." It's still a mystery as to who this Kirk guy was. Kirk Douglas was actually briefly questioned, but had no connection to Spangler's vanishing. There were multiple investigations and searches, but Spangler's fate remains unknown till this day. Ultimate Warrior. Ultimate Warrior's last appearance in the wrestling ring was haunting in retrospect. The Ultimate Warrior was huge, not just in terms of being one of the most famous wrestlers in the golden era of wrestling, right alongside Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, but he was also just like physically massive. In 2014, he appeared on Raw for the first time since 1996 to deliver a speech or promo. He'd just been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame a couple days before, and this speech ended up sounding, once again, a little too close to home in retrospect. At one point, Warrior addressed the crowd, stating, "Every man's heart one day beats its final beat. His lungs breathe a final breath. And if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others, it makes them bleed deeper and believe in something larger than life, then his essence, his spirit, will be immortalized by the storytellers, by the loyalty, by the memory of those who honor him." Warrior would suffer a heart attack the very next day. Joe Pitchler. Joe Pitchler was a former actor known for his roles in many family-oriented movies in the late 90s and early 2000s. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances once again. After leaving the entertainment industry during high school, he planned to return after graduation, but at 18 years old, Pitchler went missing on January 5th of 2006 after attending a party with friends. 4 days later, Pitchler's Toyota Corolla was discovered. Inside the car was a note in which Pitchler expressed his desire to apparently be a better brother, and he requested that his personal effects be given to his younger brother. His cell phone was also found, with the last outgoing call made at 4 a.m. to to a friend who had been at the same party. No body was found, but law enforcement authorities leaned towards the theory that Pitchler might have taken his own life. Family, though, expressed dissatisfaction with the investigation, claiming that insufficient action was being taken. They pointed out that the police didn't dust Pitchler's car for fingerprints, and there was limited effort in searching through his apartment. To this day, Joe Pitchler's disappearance remains unsolved. And finally, we have Glenn Miller's final farewell. Glenn Miller was a renowned American band leader and musician during the swing era. He achieved considerable success in the 30s and 40s. His Glenn Miller Orchestra produced numerous hit records, and he became pretty well known in the big band genre. In 1942, during World War II, Miller put his musical career on hold. As a civilian, anyway, he joined the war effort, enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Forces and forming the Glenn Miller Army Air Force Band, entertaining troops and boosting morale with his music. He made one last appearance on the radio, bidding farewell to listeners and announcing his departure into the Army. 2 weeks later, he reported for duty. On December 15th, 1944, while flying from England to France for a series of performances, Miller's plane disappeared over the English Channel. Neither the aircraft nor the occupants were ever found. As for what happened, nobody knows for sure. But there are, of course, various theories, like the possibility of friendly fire or mechanical failure. In 1945, the U.S. Army declared Glenn Miller officially presumed dead.
Starting off this countdown, we have Charles Manson. Famous cult leader Charles Manson had the reputation for being quite wild and acting strange in his interviews. This interview that I'm about to show you was conducted by ABC News. The interviewer is questioning Manson about the murders he committed. At one point, he asks Manson to describe who he is in a sentence. What a question. And then Manson just kind of loses it.
People look at you today, 20 years later, and they still have no idea what you're about. Tell me in a sentence who you are.
That must have creeped the reporter out so bad. Like, this dude was just out of his mind. After doing all those weird expressions and body movements, he tells the reporter he is nobody.
Nobody. I'm nobody.
Just the way that he whispered that sent shivers down my spine. But that's not all he had to say.
I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me.
I have no clue what any of that means. Was this Manson just putting on an act? I mean, at one point he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoid delusional disorder, but some people think he was just too smart for his own good and was just faking it all. Either way, this video gives me the creeps. In our 9th spot, we have Casey Anthony. In 2008, Casey Anthony's young daughter Kaylee went missing. Casey was obviously arrested for her disappearance and death, but in the end, prosecutors were unable to conclusively tie her to her daughter's death. In this interview, we hear Casey's side of things.
What I remember is being in bed, my mom coming in before she left for work and saying goodbye to us, and then waking up several hours later. 2 hours later, and not knowing where she was.
So your parents had her?
My dad did.
Next thing you know, she's missing, right? How did it play?
I did what I was told. I don't remember too much of what happened.
Her story just doesn't add up, and everyone knows that she did it. They just can't seem to get enough evidence to prove this, and it's incredibly sad. Coming in at number 8, we have John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was an infamous American serial killer in the 1970s, who was given the name the Killer Clown. Why? Well, he would often dress up as Pogo the Clown for neighborhood events or children's parties, which seemed to be his way of meeting his victims. In one of his interviews, he talks about why he would dress up as a clown.
The clowning was relaxation for me. I enjoyed entertaining kids. Like some people are... they unwind in different ways, either we're going out drinking or that. I could put on clown makeup and I was relaxed.
That's an odd way to find relaxation. But he continues on saying he genuinely loved being a clown. The interviewer ends up asking him if he enjoyed it because he could then lure victims to him, and Gacy denies this. That's not why he liked it. He liked it because it brought him back to feelings of being a child.
I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time. That's why I always enjoyed clowning.
Just knowing the horrors that he has done makes everything he says so scary. The interview gets worse though when the interviewer starts asking questions about Gacy's victims. According to him, he doesn't remember any of the horrific deeds that he has done.
I have a lot of things that I've forgotten that I can't remember. For instance, I can go back to my childhood and stuff and I still remember that, but yet I can go into the 70s and there are a lot of things I can't remember.
He then proceeds to grab a book that is filled with his victims' pictures and information and claims that he has studied the book over and over and can't remember anything.
I don't know if you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here, and believe it or not, for the last 12 years I've studied these photos of these victims, and there is no, we have a shot of all of the victims together here, and when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them, the thing of it is, we took it a step further. We went into their backgrounds. I wanted to know where they were at, what schools they attended, who they hung out with, and what kind of activities they were into. And that's what we dug up on each one of the victims.
Now, what he is saying is sick for a number of reasons. Many people believe that he still remembers his victims, but he's just faking this all. And in the end, he is receiving pleasure by learning more about his victims, and this also helps him recount what he did to them. Moving on to number 7, we have Charles Manson. Charles Manson was an infamous cult leader who got his followers to carry out a number of murders in the late 1960s. Manson is probably best known for the killing of the actress Sharon Tate. Well, in 1988, he did an interview and people were terribly freaked out by it. In the interview, he is talking gibberish. Half the stuff he says just doesn't make sense. Interviewer Geraldo Rivera tries to understand what Charles is going on about. At one point, Charles just gets so mad at him and starts yelling at him.
No, you who else knows what else you do? Whoa, I said, you haven't seen the bloody trail yet. You haven't seen the bloody trail yet. What do you mean? Oh, it's been worse than that. You think, the 9 was just the first little marbles in the bucket. There's a whole row of people out there that's been getting killed.
At another point, he says, all you want to do is sell death, blood, and fear. So, that's creepy. And then at another point, he just gets up and starts doing this weird dance.
Yeah, I make the laws from here.
Which, according to a number of sources, he did this in a number of interviews randomly. He did this to avoid prison, so people would be like, oh, he's not in the right set of mind, he needs to be placed elsewhere. Moving on to number 6, we have Otis Toole. Otis Toole, or the Jacksonville Cannibal, is a serial killer convicted of 6 counts of murder. He's most famous for killing the son of America's most wanted host, John Walsh. In an interview from 1993, we see how dark and twisted Toole really is. He would talk about his dark desires, like watching an entire city burn. He then went on to justify his killings, saying that taking someone's life is no different than stepping on a bug or eating animal meat. There's way more disturbing stuff that he discusses, but it's just too much to talk about on YouTube. Like, he goes into depth about his killings. It's way too much to hear. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Joel Rifkin.
Tragedy happens in lives. Unfortunately, it was their lives.
The world wouldn't know his name until after his killing spree had ended. Now, in a rare prison interview, serial killer Joel Rifkin talks about his sickening crimes down to the smallest detail.
Joel Rifkin was an American serial killer responsible for taking the lives of 17 women in the 1990s. He was caught in 1993 when cops pulled him over for a missing license plate. But to their horrors, they found his latest victim in his trunk. He was then sentenced to 203 years in prison. In this interview, Joel just seems so proud of himself when he's recalling his crimes. He also talks about the police's interrogation process and why he confessed to the crimes. The most disturbing thing though is when he admits to keeping trophies from each of his victims. He said he did this so that he could remember each victim and what he did to them. As
the numbers started to increase, an ID would, okay, that has a photo, I know who that girl was, or a piece of jewelry, okay, I know that it's from that girl.
In our fourth spot, we have Israel Keys. Israel Keys started his killings in 1996 and continued on until March of 2012 when he was finally arrested. He was known for traveling to a number of locations to commit his crimes. Then he would rob banks and homes so that he could afford to travel to kill. In this interview, we see him talk about his killings and how he selected his victims.
When I was smart, I would let them come to me. Just remote area.
People just found it gross how calmly he talks about this all while eating a bagel and drinking. He continued on saying what his strategy was, and that was to grab people in remote locations like parks and campgrounds, even cemeteries.
You might not get exactly what there's not as much to choose from in a manner of speaking, but there's also no witnesses really, there's nobody else around.
In our third spot, we have Chris Watts. If you've seen the Netflix documentary on Chris Watts and his family, then you know how messed up this whole story is. Chris is guilty of killing his wife and their 2 daughters. When he was brought into questioning, he denied having anything to do with this. But after failing the polygraph test, the police started nailing him hard. That's when he came up with this elaborate lie about what happened.
After that, I went downstairs and I want to protect her. What? I want to protect her. You don't want to protect her?
It's crazy seeing him put on this whole show and turning his wife into a criminal, saying she was the one that hurt their daughters and then he hurt her as a result.
Huh? She hurt him? Yeah. And well, no, not her. You hurt her.
In the end, the officers saw right through his fabricated story. But still, it's crazy. Moving on to number 2, we have Richard Kuklinski.
I could get over on you, get you to do what I wanted you to do, is to hurt your family.
Richard started killing at a very young age. He committed his first murder when he was just 13 years old. Over the span of his career, he took the lives of around 200 people. Could even be more. I mean, he would often kill homeless people just for fun. On top of that, he worked as a hitman for the mafia. So yeah, his count is pretty high. It was revealed that any person who was ever deemed his friend was eventually killed off by him. In 1988, he was caught by an undercover cop and sent to prison. In this interview, it is truly disturbing to see the lack of remorse he has. Listen to him talk about him shooting a guy.
And I went pop, 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 and then I went pop, pop. And I could see the material moving on his jacket as these things. Actually, they made little marks on it. On the jacket, I guess they were burn marks.
I think the scariest part was all of a sudden during the interview, he gets this messed up smile on his face and just stares at the interviewer for an uncomfortable amount of time. I legit got uncomfortable for the interviewer. And then, after that long, unbearable pause, he starts asking the interviewer questions.
What do you think about me? Anything good, bad, or indifferent?
It just made me cringe. It's so bad. And in our number 1 spot, we have Zachary Davis. This interview gave me the chills. It makes me so uncomfortable. So this is the interview of Zachary Davis. In August of 2012, he took his mother's life before trying to set his house on fire with his brother inside. Now, Zachary has been diagnosed with a number of mental illnesses, including schizophrenia and depressive disorder. In 2007, when he was 9 years old, his father passed away from ALS, and that apparently started this all. He just spiraled out of control and became withdrawn. He even had an app on his phone about serial killers, and in his notebooks he would write about disturbing things, like you can't spell slaughter without laughter. The creepiest part of this interview is when Dr. Phil asks him about the murder weapon, which was a sledgehammer. At one point while discussing it, he literally smiles as if he's proud of what he did. That sent shivers down my spine. It is terrifying. Starting off this countdown, we have Elizabeth Wetlaufer.
I've done this and I'm ready to face it, but I would love to go.
Elizabeth Wetlaufer was a Canadian registered nurse for 9 years in southwestern Ontario. In 2016, she quit her nursing job, checked herself into a psychiatric hospital, and confessed to her crimes. Apparently, between 2007 to 2016, she used her powers as a nurse to take the lives of 8 of her patients and injured 6 others. She would do so by giving them lethal doses of insulin. She also admitted to stealing opioids to fuel her personal addiction. After she confessed to the killings, an interview took place with the police, and that's when she confessed her crimes once again, this time in a detailed statement. Apparently, she had voices in her head telling her to kill those patients.
Part of me had started to believe that it was the devil, and part of me thought it might be God as a purpose through my life.
At first, she believed that this was God talking to her, so she felt okay killing for him. Then later on, she thought maybe it was the devil. On top of that, she claimed that it was a gut instinct telling her that these people needed to be killed. And once she did the deed, she would hear laughter in her chest.
Whatever it wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in here. And when I would do it, afterwards I would hear like a laughter in my head.
She was sentenced to 8 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. In our 9th spot, we have Robert Durst. Robert Durst is an American convicted murderer and possible serial killer. It all started in 1982 with the disappearance of his wife, Kathy Durst. Obviously, he was the main suspect. Then in 2000, he murdered one of his friends, Susan Berman, and in 2001, he killed his neighbor. And just this year, he was finally convicted for killing his wife. During his interviews and interrogations, he maintained his innocence, claiming that he never did it. But after one of his final interviews, he made a grave mistake. He went to the bathroom and didn't realize that his mic was still on. While in the bathroom, he was talking to himself and basically confessed to the killings.
There it is. You're caught. Disaster. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
The interviewers were completely shocked by what they heard, and Robert was immediately arrested. In our 8th spot, we have Daniel Wozenak. Daniel Wozenak is a former community theater actor who in May of 2010 took the lives of 2 people. During that time, he was struggling financially. He was in debt and unemployed. Then when he heard that his friend Sam Herr had $62,000 from combat pay, he decided to kill Sam in order to steal his money. Then he ended up killing a woman named Julie Kabushi, a 23-year-old college student who was tutoring Sam. His plan was to make it seem like Sam killed Julie and then went on the run, but in the end, he was caught. This video is from the police interrogation of Daniel. Here's him putting the blame on Sam.
Opened the door, it was Sam. Alright. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Everything good? And he's like, not good, we're in trouble. We need to get the out of here. And so we drove, he's like, there's a dead body in my apartment. He said he'd been doing some heavy drugs. He's like, I shot somebody. I was not happy about it. It was a fit of rage, and honestly, she had it coming. I said she.
But of course, the police weren't buying his story. It was all too convenient.
Where's the gun, Sam? What did you do with the gun?
I'm not Sam, my name's Dan.
I know, but that's what you were, wasn't that what you were asking him?
No, I have nothing to do with this because my life was in danger with my wife. I'm sorry.
How was your life in danger?
He threatened it.
The 2 interrogators could see through Daniel's act. In fact, they said it was as if he was putting on a theater show for them. In the end, Daniel did confess, but figured he might try and act insane in order to get off with lesser charges.
Money and insanity. Money and insanity. Okay.
Coming Coming in at number 7, we have Jeffrey Dahmer. This interview of Jeffrey Dahmer that I'm about to share with you is said to be his last interview ever. It all started when Jeffrey started torturing animals at a young age. Then when he was around 14 or 15, he started to have impulses to hurt humans instead.
I don't know, it became a compulsion, and it switched from animals to humans. I still don't understand it. I don't know why.
If your fantasy life as a teenager includes killing, who do you tell?
It then just got worse and worse according to Dahmer.
Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't.
You thought that was bad? Well, he goes on to talk about his first kill, which happened when he was only 18 years old.
I was 18 years old, driving home. I saw this hitchhiker about a mile from my house. He caught my eye. I drove past him, thought to myself, should I stop and pick him up or should I just keep on going? I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. I turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality.
It's the fact that he can recount all these horrors with no emotion, no tone whatsoever. It's like he's reading from a script. He shows no remorse. In our 6th spot today, we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was known to be super intelligent, charming, and manipulative during his interviews, so interviewers had to be extremely careful. He knew exactly what people wanted to hear and carefully catered his responses to that. The interview we're going to look at today is from 1977 while Bundy was in prison. During the interview, the reporter asks him if he's nervous about the evidence that they have against him. This was his snarky little reply.
Okay, I mean, you have access to information, but I'm on the inside. I know what's there and I know what isn't there. I've seen the files and I've heard the reports. And Lord knows I'm the first and foremost person who has the personal and intimate knowledge that it couldn't be me, that it's not me, that I'm innocent.
Although everything he was saying was a lie. He often would try to manipulate the interviewers into thinking he was innocent when we all know that was not the case. Take a look at this next clip, for example.
What happens if you're in prison 5 years and nothing like what has happened in the past happens again?
What do you mean?
I mean, any of the things that you have been accused of by innuendo, by rumor, by the police departments or whatever. What if there are no killings, there are no kidnappings?
It's already happened, hasn't it?
The main thing to focus on here is his facial expression. The smirk, the struggling to hide a smile when the guy is talking about Bundy getting caught and going to prison. I think any normal person would be scared of being caught, especially when they know that they did it. But Bundy was so cocky and assured of himself that he thought he was gonna get away with it all. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman was an English doctor and serial killer. It was discovered that he took the lives of a number of patients under his care, his total number of victims being around 250. Imagine that, you go to a hospital thinking that they're gonna save you, but instead end up being the cause of your death. Now, during Harold's police interrogations, he refused to speak and refused to look at any piece of evidence that they had against him. In particular, he would not look at the photos of his victims.
Lily Crossley, if you'd like to look at that, just for the benefit of the tape. Dr. Shipman's eyes are closed and he didn't look at the photograph at all. Can you remember Lily Crossley at all? Okay, no answer.
Now, Shipman was obviously doing this so he wouldn't give anything away. But in fact, his very actions in this interview gave away everything. Investigators noticed that when they presented the victim's image in front of him, he would freeze and stop breathing for 9 seconds. So they immediately knew that there's something up with him.
That's Elizabeth Pierce. The 3 ladies there, it's the elderly lady dressed in black. For the benefit of the tape, Dr. Shipman's eyes are closed and he did not look at.
He doesn't breathe for 9 seconds after they said her name. So Elizabeth Pierce, that name is a problem for him. Something about that victim is causing his body stress, and that is one of the reasons why police knew he had done these horrific crimes. Moving on, at number 4 we have Colin Norris. Colin Norris was a nurse that was found guilty of taking the lives of 4 of his elderly patients. He would do so by injecting them with lethal doses of insulin. During his interrogation, he was adamant that he was not guilty.
You were also injecting a patient with insulin.
No, I wasn't. You're sitting there saying, you suspect, you presume, you blah blah blah.
Both men preyed on people they'd been trusted to look after.
So they brought him in for the murder of Ethel Hall. He was the last person who had been with Ethel before she slipped into a coma and sadly passed away.
Obviously, if somebody was going to kill someone, they wouldn't leave their signature, would they?
What do you mean by that?
To say that they were there. I was doing my job.
You were doing your job?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you were also injecting a patient with insulin.
No, I wasn't.
He then goes on to try and convince them why he is innocent. So they accused him of injecting her with insulin. Well, this is what he had to say in his defense.
It would have, if you say, like, somebody came and injected me with that, I would say to somebody, wait a minute, what are you doing? Even when you're giving patients their, like, morphine for through the night or whatever, when you inject them, they do make a noise because, I mean, have you ever been injected with anything? So somebody would have noticed a noise from the patient. And or if the patient was asleep, they would have certainly woke up if somebody went and injected.
The worst part is when he slipped up and literally told the interrogators that he doesn't like old people, and that's basically why he committed these crimes.
Norris admitted finding elderly patients challenging.
The smells.
The smells?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't get used to the smells. When I was bathing female patients, having to wash them down below, I found it difficult to start with, especially if they were like 80s with my gran.
That just makes me sick. He was there to look after the elderly and did the exact opposite. In our 3rd spot we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos is often considered the first female serial killer. She was found guilty of taking the lives of 7 men. This is the last interview of her before she received the death penalty.
You know, I was just wondering how you're going to be, you know, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm alright with it.
At this point, Eileen was proud of her murders. She didn't want to die, but she had accepted her fate. At one point, she claimed she couldn't stand being on death row any longer since she had already been there for 10 years. At this point, she just wanted to die.
Prepared yourself for tomorrow morning.
I'm alright with it. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Hey, I was tortured at BCI. They had the intercom on in the room, and they kept lying that it wasn't on, and they were using sonic pressure on my head since 1997.
This seemed to be true to Eileen. Being locked away, she started to grow paranoid. She thought that the people making her food were spitting in it, and that she was being attacked by a sonic weapon, aka the intercom. Anyways, let's move on.
What more is there to say about the cops? What more do you want to say about the cops?
A lot of stuff. Did you know that they were surveilling me before I killed? And then I knew it? Then I know that the cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died. I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up. And let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer.
If this is true, then this is incredibly messed up. And then when she gets mad, it's actually really scary.
You killed 7 men.
Yes, you
did.
did.
And I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7 men?
And I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it? Ladder climbs, the election, everything else. I got a big finger in all your faces. Thanks a lot. You're inhuman. You're an inhumane bunch of and you're going to get nuked in the end. And pretty soon it's coming.
It got intense. I think her facial expressions and wide eyes make it 10 times scarier. Like if I was that interviewer, I would have peed my pants. In our 2nd spot today, we have Paul Bernardo. Paul Bernardo is a Canadian serial killer who, along with his partner Karla Homolka, carried out a number of horrific crimes in Scarborough, Ontario. This is footage from his interview with Toronto police detectives.
Did you kill Elizabeth Bain on June the 19th, 1990?
Well, it's a loaded question. I mean, are we going to go back and go through the time sequence of what happened in my life? I mean, I could just give a yes or no answer, but you know, there's a lot of issues about that.
In a way, he reminds me of Ted Bundy, constantly tiptoeing around the questions, saying what he thinks they want to hear, and trying to outsmart them.
Hey, did you kill this person? I mean, well, you're saying I'm lying here, here, and here. I could say, no, I didn't. But I mean, you already said I'm lying here with the PO. You're saying.
Okay, I'm not saying anything about who's lying. I'm simply.
And I've given you directions to go to find the truth.
Right.
No one's done that.
Also, take in how he is smiling throughout this, like it's fun games for him. It makes me sick. He's literally having fun with this all. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Karla Homolka. Now, we talked about her counterpart, Paul, so it's only fair that we talk about Karla herself. Basically, what happened is that Karla confessed to her roles in the murders and testified against Paul to get out of a harsher sentence. In this interview, she puts on an innocent act and tries to blame Paul for everything that they did.
He kept on pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally I said, okay.
She tried to make it seem like she was a victim and being controlled by Paul.
If I didn't turn the water tap off completely, he'd hit me. If I didn't say the right thing, he'd hit me. He held knives to my throat. He told me I better watch my back. He said, always watch your back with me.
From our understanding, this was her strategy to pin the blame all on him so she could get away with the murders.
Starting us off in our number 10 spot is Son of Sam. Well, you are probably already familiar with this one, considering he is one of the most infamous killers of all time. The Son of Sam, or legally David Berkowitz, was an evil killer responsible for the death of at least 6 people in New York City during the 1970s, and who famously blamed his evil doings on his possession. Prior to his arrest, Berkowitz liked to taunt the police and would send in mocking letters with the promise of further crimes, which eventually developed into becoming highly publicized by the press. Then, by 1977, he was finally arrested on account of 8 shootings. Now, initially, he confessed to all of the killings, stating he was obeying orders of a demon that manifested in his neighbor's dog, Sam, hence the name, and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in state prison. Berkowitz claimed that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls and that the possessed Labrador issued irresistible commands. Even scarier, in 1977, after his arrest, he was permitted to write a letter to the public, in which he stated that there were other sons, seemingly meaning he was not alone in these crimes, but no one else was ever charged. Now, I have to admit, later in the 90s, after becoming an evangelical Christian, he backpedaled, saying that the devil in the dog story was all a hoax, and that he was actually a part of a satanic cult that orchestrated the incidents as ritual killings. But I mean, either way, he was a super evil dude, so I'm just glad he got caught. Next up at number 9, Tommy Smith. Peter Churm was a kind and loving father and grandfather who was tragically attacked on February 24th, 2015 when 17-year-old Tommy Smith tried to steal the keys to the old man's Range Rover. At the time of the attack, Churm attempted to stop who he believed was just some young punk. However, unbeknownst to him, Tommy had already racked up a staggering 57 offenses, and Churm was going to be his next. In the blink of an eye, Smith stabbed the old man all over his body, allegedly with so much vigor that the blade snapped in 2. However, astonishingly, Peter survived. Fast forward to the following year, and Tommy is on trial for his attack, among his other crimes. But despite the long rap sheet, Smith explained to the jury, or rather insisted, that he was not responsible for his actions, as he had been possessed by a demon on that terrible day. Now, it's hard to say if the jury really did take it into account or not. However, it was also known that Smith was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and so he was cleared of the killing charge and instead sent to a secure hospital indefinitely. Coming in at number 8, a Satanist group. In August of 2008, in a forest outside the city of Yaroslav, police were horrified when they came across 4 utterly corpses. The bodies had been desecrated beyond belief, but after lots of hard work, investigators were able to determine that all of the victims were and that each had been robbed either before or after their death. However, after taking into consideration the brutality of the crime, they weren't convinced that robbery was the only motive. Eventually, they discovered the atrocity had been carried out by a group of 6 self-proclaimed Satanists who, after a number of animal sacrifices, felt that humans had to be killed in order to please Lucifer. So, under the possession of Satan, the group, dubbed the Yaroslav Killers, dismembered the 4 teens as a part of an initiation ritual before allegedly ingesting some of the flesh themselves. Eventually, the group faced a trial in 2010, and the leader of the group, Nikolai, was sentenced to 20 years, while the others received varying sentences ranging from 8 to 10 years behind bars.
In our 7th spot, we have patient number 18. Now, this has got to be one of the creepiest and mysterious clips on the internet. It's an interview featuring a man named Patient 18. This interview is filmed at a psychiatric hospital, and this man is there because he has schizophrenia. This tape is actually what schools use to teach their students about schizophrenia and the mind. But it's mysterious because we don't know much about this dude. Now, I just want to say, having schizophrenia or mental health issues does not make this guy an evil person. He's on today's list because apparently at the hospital he admitted to taking someone's life. Plus, he has a history of criminal behavior. Upon doing more research, this might be a man named Stephen E. Anyways, take a look at this interview.
And what happened that ended up with your being here in the hospital?
The psychiatrist decided that this was the situation for me.
Did he tell you why?
No, the psychiatrist did not.
Has anybody told you why?
No.
I got chills. I don't know about you. It's quite interesting how he carefully plans out his answers. Plus, no matter what they're talking about, he still shows no emotion.
And in what way are you different?
I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do. And this influences my thinking and consequently my actions.
He may seem calm on the outside, but what you can't imagine is everything that's going on in his head. You can tell he's trying hard to stay in control.
As soon as I express the belief that I do not belong in this hospital, which is a mental hospital, then those who dislike me want to find a worse place for me.
In our 6th spot, we have Alonso Perez. In 2016, Alonso Perez was charged for a series of crimes, including robbery with use of a deadly weapon, attempted murder with use of a deadly weapon, grand larceny, and battery. He was also arrested in connection with the death of Mohammed Robinson. This is footage of Alonso inside of the interrogation cell waiting to be questioned. But not much of that actually happens, as he manages to escape. First, we see him looking around at the cameras, and then he decides to forcibly remove his handcuffs. Now, he does manage to get them off, but he's not ready to leave yet. He hasn't thought of a plan. So he pretends that his handcuffs are still on and he thinks of an escape plan. When he thinks of his plan, he gets up, climbs up, and escapes by crawling through the ceiling. He then drove away in a rental truck that someone left with the engine running. But don't worry, it was short-lived freedom because within days he was caught again, and in more trouble. In the end though, he did plead guilty to 3 murders. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations, and then he would murder them. Sometimes he would even eat certain parts of his victims. In this interview, what shocks a lot of people is the fact that everyone expects him to act like a monster, but in fact, he acts quite the opposite. He seems innocent, which is either an act or, his true personality. So he keeps up the innocent act saying how he feels sorry, blah blah blah. But the act drops when he is asked one question. Now the interview is in Russian, but I have the translation. So the interviewer asks him if he has ever thought about meeting his victims in heaven or hell. He answers with, and I quote, "No, I have never thought about that, never. I feel like it doesn't bother me. I have never thought about it. I have already passed all rounds of hell in my life. I am already ready to pass away to the other world again." That right there is creepy, not gonna lie. In our fourth spot we have David Berkowitz, but you probably better know him as the Son of Sam. He was a serial killer who took the lives of 6 individuals and wounded 7 others in New York City for more than a year. He would typically target good-looking young women with long brown hair. As a result, a number of women were cutting their hair short or dyeing it blonde. He was eventually known as the Son of Sam because he would leave letters near his victims' bodies, signing it off with that name. In the end, he was caught and claimed that his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon, and that this demon dog was the one telling him to kill these people. Wild, I know. Well, years later, he did this interview. He admits to being into Satanism and how it influenced him.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about Satan, what are you actually referring to?
Well, many people may not really understand that, but there was a time I was so confused and so troubled that I was seeking meaning and purpose. I was seeking something, I don't know, as my life began to spin out of control. I mean, I got involved in like Satanism, and I was reading the Satanic Bible. And
he continues on talking about himself, but a lot of people believe he was just putting on an act the whole time, that he was trying to convince people that he's normal so that he would be released early. This is pretty common among serial killers. They love to manipulate people.
How does it feel to be here for 30 years knowing that this is going to be it?
It's like, the expression, take one day at a time, and it's never easy, being incarcerated. I have no one to blame but myself.
In our third spot we have Michael Beaver. In July of 2015, 16-year-old Michael Beaver and his 18-year-old brother Robert took the lives of their parents and 3 siblings. They first attacked their sister. When she screamed, their mother ran out of the bedroom and they stabbed her over 50 times. Eventually, they worked their way around the house, killing their family members. It's a very scary and graphic case. In this interview, Michael completely confesses to everything to an officer.
So he was buying weapons because you guys had talked about murdering.
Yeah, and he started planning again.
Okay. And that you didn't want to do it?
I don't want to do it. I didn't, just because I didn't kill anyone.
Okay.
I stabbed someone.
Who did you stab?
My younger brother, Christopher.
Christopher? How old's Christopher?
9, I think.
What did you stab him with?
My knife.
What's your knife look like?
There's literally no emotion in his voice, and for being so young, he doesn't seem affected by this at all. But here's the thing, this guy was obsessed with other killers, and the police officer noticed this and kept prying.
Because you mentioned a couple names are those like serial killers or something?
Well, like Columbine?
Yeah.
Columbine and James Egan Holmes. James Egan Holmes is a guy that shot at the theater.
In Colorado?
Yeah, he killed 12 and...
Wow. How many were killed in Columbine?
Columbine? I don't know, like 15,
okay.
I think.
He knew the killer's first and last names and their kill count. No one just knows that information off the top of their head, so that's creepy. In our second spot we had the BTK killer. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes and was sentenced to 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. This video is Dennis's confession to killing Maureen Hedge.
So I very carefully snuck into the house, kind of like a cat burglar, and after checking the house, she wasn't there. So about that time, the doors rattled, so I went back to one of the bedrooms and hid back there in one of the bedrooms.
He then proceeded to talk about how he stayed in her house for hours until the next morning when he woke up and strangled her.
No, I manually strangled her when she started to scream.
So you used your hands?
Yes, sir.
And you strangled her? Did she die?
Yes.
It's chilling seeing him talk so casually about all of this. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Issei Sagawa.
たった指先ほどの小さな銃弾を放ったことによってさまざまな人たちを傷つけ、あるいは変えてしまう。
If you haven't heard of this case, then whew, Brace yourself, because it's a very dark and gruesome one. In 1981, Issei Sagawa killed and ate a woman named Renee Hartfelt. Apparently, he always had a fantasy to eat a beautiful human. When he saw Renee, he knew she was the one. On June 11th, 1981, he invited her over, and then he shot her at the back of the neck and then ate her over the next 2 days. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he was never convicted of his crimes. He literally spent 2 days in jail, then was sent back to Japan, and then he became a celebrity there. He was so famous that he made a living through the public's interest in his crime. Imagine that, literally becoming wealthy for killing someone. He's guilty, he's even admitted to it, but he never got penalized. Here are some disturbing moments from an interview with him.
多分もう一晩でも食事をルネとしていたら食べる対象には考えたことはない。自分の書いたシナリオ、ずっと前からそういうシチュエーションを考えて、どっから食べる、どうやってやる、全てこう頭の中にシナリオができてた。
He continues on, going into gruesome details about his murder and about another time that he attacked a different woman. I personally had a hard time sitting still watching this. It's just way too much. Starting off this countdown, we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos is often considered the first female serial killer. She was found guilty of killing 7 men. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Although she claims every murder was self-defense. In our interview, we can see how lax she is when talking about killing.
Just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Death and murder literally doesn't faze her at all. In fact, she claims that what she did wasn't even bad. Yeah, she tries to justify her actions by saying she just shot them, as if that's not a big deal.
But you've been convicted of killing 7 men.
Everybody's looking at the number.
Does that not, you killed 7 men, 7 strangers, does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill them every day, did I?
Again, she's acting like her killing 7 men isn't a big deal. Like, oh, it's just 7 men, people have done worse. It's crazy. Moving on to number 9, we have the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer and robber who killed 13 to 16 plus individuals. At his trials, the judge stated that he never showed any remorse for these doings. I think the creepiest part about his interview is when he admits to being evil.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not? Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
And we see him try to justify his killings by saying the government does worse things to people than what he has done.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
In our 8th spot, we have Edward Edwards. Edward Wayne Edwards, otherwise known as the Hook Man or the Man with the Hook, was an American con artist turned serial killer. In fact, when he committed his long list of crimes, he never wore a mask because he wanted to be famous. In 2010, he did an interview and confessed to all his crimes. Again, it makes me so uncomfortable listening to how killers took someone's life.
Taking his hand, he's going through the bottom of the duffel bag trying to find the cigarettes, and I'm standing right here, and I have the sawed-off shotgun, and I ease it out of the bag while Danny's down there looking, and
He's just too calm talking about all of this. During the interview, he also stated that he wanted the death penalty and thinks that he deserves it.
I want the death penalty.
You don't want us to be in prison for a long time on everything else that's going on.
Right, I'm not a healthy man.
Next up at number 7, Jason Nelson. On the night of May 26, 2015, a man named Jason Nelson visited the home of his dealer, Jordan McGuire. However, instead of their usual exchange, Nelson, out of nowhere, repeatedly stabbed the young man before fleeing off into the night. Thankfully, police were able to track him down not too long after, and it didn't take them long to discover upon interviewing him that he was also responsible for a slew of other crimes that same night, like the essay of a 25-year-old and 60-year-old, both of whom lived near the site where McGuire had been killed. However, what they didn't see coming was his excuse, that a demon had told him to do it. According to Jason, the night of the crimes, he was possessed by an evil entity who forced him to kill McGuire and commit SA on the women. However, this excuse didn't quite hold up all too well, and he still ended up being charged for the crimes, and by October of 2015 he was sentenced to life with a possibility of parole after 27 years. Next up at number 6, Cody Lott. Back in 2016, two middle schoolers, Lauren and Michaela, were walking home after school. This wasn't an unusual activity for the girls. However, this time they were approached by 20-year-old Cody Lott in his car. After making eye contact with Michaela, he pulled out his weapon and began at the girls, sadly taking the life of Lauren that day. According to witnesses, he first Lauren, then Michaela, before returning his focus to the already and dying Lauren. However, the sickest part of this was what he said in his 2018 trial. Lott initially repeated that it was the devil that had helped him to plan the shooting, and he was therefore not responsible for the girl's death. However, he also mentioned that he believed that Lauren had a boyfriend and that he was jealous of that. Which, I mean, is first of all, incredibly gross, as let's just remember that Lauren was in middle school and that the killer was 20. However, secondly, seems a bit contradictory for someone who claimed to be possessed by a demon. Initially, Lott was found mentally unfit to stand trial and was sent to the maximum security unit of Texas Mental Hospital. But later in September of 2018, a jury found him guilty of the killing as well as the aggravated on Michaela, and so Lott, the man who claimed to have talked with the devil, was sentenced to life in prison. Coming in at number 5, Louis Zambrano. On September 18th, 2015, the body of a woman was discovered inside of an abandoned car in Queens, New York. After a bit of investigating, authorities were able to confirm that the body belonged to 28-year-old Angie Escobar, who had tragically died after being stabbed roughly 80 times 4 days prior. This of course sent them into an investigation to find the perpetrator, and before long, Louis Zambrano was arrested for the brutal crime. Initially, during his interrogation with authorities, Zambrano confessed to police that he had done it. Apparently Angie was his girlfriend, and she confronted him saying that she no longer wanted to be together, and so he used a pair of scissors to get his revenge. However, it wasn't quite that simple. Next, he explained, while still pleading guilty, that he had been possessed by a demon at the time of the killing, plus he apparently also blamed his trust issues for his actions. Now, my question is, if he really was possessed at the time of the killing, why would he also be pleading guilty? I don't know. It's probably best I don't think too hard about it. In the end, this evil man was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years behind bars for his crimes, but to this day still claims that his possession was the reason behind it all. Coming in at number 4, Jason Dalton. If you have never had uber anxiety before today, this might be the story that gets it started. Back in 2016, Jason Dalton appeared to be your average Uber driver. However, he had a dark secret. He was inexplicably killing a bunch of people. The day was February 20th, 2016, and he shot and killed 62-year-old Mary Louie Nye and her sister-in-law, 60-year-old Joe Nye, 74-year-old Dorothy Brown, 68-year-old Barbara Hawthorne, and 53-year-old Richard Smith and his 17-year-old son Tyler. But the most bone-chilling part was that in between these killings, he continued to pick up and drop off passengers at their preferred destinations. Now, out of all of the possessions I've heard about, Dalton's story is easily the wildest, as he told police during his interrogation that it was the actual Uber app that had taken over his mind. Quote, "I know you guys are gonna have a hard time believing this, but it literally took over my mind and body." He then elaborated saying that he saw, quote, "the symbol symbol of the Eastern Star inside the Uber app, and a horned devil head regularly appeared on his phone screen whenever he logged on for work. After a 3-year-long trial, Dalton was sentenced to life in prison, but even so, he stood firmly by his statement that a demon living in the Uber app possessed him to randomly kill 7 people. Coming in at number 3, Arne Johnson. In the early 1980s, the Glatzel family and Arne Johnson made headlines after Arne, seemingly out of nowhere, was not only charged for killing his landlord, but was the first man in the US to claim demonic possession as the reason for his innocence against the charges he was facing. However, to explain his 1981 charges, we have to go back a little. Prior to the infamous trial, the youngest member of the Glatzel family, David Glatzel, began seeing visions of what he described was a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. Soon after, David was believed to be possessed by an evil demon living inside their home. Eventually, after things began getting worse, the family enlisted the help of the famed duo Ed and Lorraine Warren, hoping that they could drive the demon out of the boy. Now, Arne Johnson was the fiance of David's older sister Debbie, and allegedly during the final exorcism on David, Arne stormed in and told the demon to leave the boy alone and come into him. And according to Arne, that is exactly what happened. A few months later, he got into an argument with his landlord, who he had previously had a good standing relationship with, and stabbed him multiple times. In the end, he was convicted for his crimes, but never wavered that the devil had made him do it. Coming in at number 2, Michael Taylor. Back in 1974, a beloved and cheerful family man without any previous criminal history seemed to suddenly change overnight into a different person. The previously non-religious man joined a local church and quickly became entangled with a 21-year-old preacher, Marie Robinson, who convinced her congregation that the power of God could drive out their demons. However, strangely, the more he became involved with Robinson and the church, the more he changed. The once kind and patient man was turning irritated and foul-mouthed, and it all came to a head when he and the preacher were found naked together. This kind of behavior was so out of character for Michael that the church decided to exorcise him, believing he was possessed. They strapped him down and allegedly exorcised a whopping 40 demons from his body, but it would turn out that that wasn't enough, as still 3 demons remained inside him. That night, Michael brutally killed and dismembered his wife and dog, and upon being arrested, told police that he was possessed by Satan, who had compelled him to destroy everything living within his house. Deemed unfit for trial, Taylor was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a psychiatric facility to live out the rest of his life. And last up in our number 1 spot, Sean Sellers. In his early years, Sean had a very difficult life. His upbringing was a mixture of unreliable and abusive alcoholic parents, mixed with incredibly cruel psychological torture from nearly every adult in his life. And tragically, this pattern of abuse eventually led to a giant explosion that resulted in multiple deaths. On the evening of March 5th, 1986, while wearing nothing but his underwear, Sean crept into his parents' room, caught them in their sleep, and took both their lives. However, this wasn't his first offense. It was later discovered that a year prior, he killed a Circle K employee who had refused to sell him beer. Now, the haunting part about this whole case is that Sean claims to have no recollection of the killings. He did, however, make it very clear that prior to killing his parents, he had taken part in an occult ritual and that he was a practicing Satanist, clarifying that at the time of each offense, he was under demonic possession of the demon Ezerate, and that he was not responsible for the crimes committed. Not only that, but similarly to the case of Arne Johnson, his defense attorney used this story and even blamed Dungeons and Dragons, claiming that it had made him unable to connect his actions to real-world consequences. The story, however, did not sway the jury, and Sean became the youngest criminal sentenced to death in America since 1976.
And we're starting off the list with Bison Dele. Bryson Dell, born Brian Carson Williams, was a former NBA player. This interview from 1999 would have been one of his last, if not the last, as he retired right before the start of the 1999-2000 season. The interview is interesting. Bison seems a little off in his own world. I don't necessarily think this has anything to do with his disappearance. For one, everyone has off days. Plus, he wouldn't go missing until 3 years later. In July of 2002, Dele, along with his girlfriend Serena Carlin and skipper Bertrand Saldo, set sail on Dele's catamaran called the Hakuna Matata in the South Pacific. The trio was last heard from in Tahiti in early July. Dele's brother, Miles DeBoard, who was also on the boat, contacted his family from a port in Tahiti, claiming that he had left the boat due to a family dispute. In September of 2002, the Hakuna Matata was found off the coast of Tahiti with only DeBoard on board. DeBoard was later arrested, being the #1 suspect. He provided conflicting stories about what had happened, initially claiming self-defense in a fight with Dele, Serena, and Saldo. Despite extensive searches, the whereabouts of Bison, Serena Carlin, and Bertrand Saldo remain unknown, but it's likely their bodies were dumped overboard somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. If you are enjoying our channel so far, don't forget to leave your comments down below. Let us know your thoughts, suggestions for further videos, and hit that subscribe button as well. Alright, the final Brandon Lee interview. This one always gives me goosebumps. This interview is from 1993 or 94 on the set of The Crow, where Lee would suffer a fatal accident on set. Any situation like this is obviously tragic, but what makes this sting even more is how young he was. This was his breakout movie, and the incident is chilling for a couple different reasons. First of all, Brandon Lee's father, of course, Bruce Lee, also died prematurely right around when his biggest movie was coming out, Enter the Dragon. Secondly, the whole premise of The Crow centers around death. The main character, Eric Draven, and his fiancée die at the hands of violent thugs, and he comes back to life as a vengeful spirit of sorts to settle the score. It's a gothic masterpiece, one of my all-time favorite movies, but the context surrounding it definitely adds a somber layer to the viewing experience. And this last interview with Lee hits almost too close to home. At the end of the interview, Lee, talking about the themes of the movie, says, quote, "Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times. And a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood? An afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you cannot conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4, 5 more times? Perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20. And yet, it all seems limitless." Next on the list is Richie Edwards, guitarist and songwriter for the Welsh rock band Manic Street Preachers. This is the last interview with Edwards in 1995. The interview is a pretty standard musician interview. He talks about his career, the music he's written so far, where he thinks the band is going next. He also talks about how he wants to write the perfect lyric, quote, "A lyric that sums up exactly how I feel about everything, not just how I feel today, how I've felt all my life. Everything I've read, everything I've seen, everything I believe. In those 15 lines, you can just see it all." This is something I think many artists strive for, to make a piece of work that completely encapsulates who and what they are. On February 1st, 1995, though, Edwards checked out of the Embassy Hotel in London and drove to his apartment in Cardiff. Later that day, his car was found near the Severn Bridge. Edwards was never located. His disappearance left many questions unanswered, as there was no conclusive evidence indicating what happened to him. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Edwards was apparently exhibiting some signs of emotional distress, including self-harm and depression. He also was known to have issues with addiction. In 2008, Edwards was officially declared presumed dead by the courts, but his body has still never been found, and there are various theories that have been proposed, even one including the possibility that he faked his own death in order to start a new life free of fame. That's something that comes up a lot with musicians. People just don't like accepting that they might actually just be gone.
In our 7th spot, we have Paris Bennett. During an interview with Piers Morgan, Paris Bennett, who at 13 years of age killed his young sister, admits that he did this as a way to punish his mother.
Specifically in the end, yes, to cause your mother maximum pain. This has achieved your goal, which was to effectively mean your mother lost both her children at once.
In 2007, Bennett convinced their babysitter to leave early and then proceeded to stab his sister 17 times. It's such a tragic case. What makes it worse is how he pretends to say he loved his sister. In the interview, he was asked to describe why he loved his sister, and he couldn't.
Because I loved her. I loved her with every fiber of my being.
They say it's like asking a colorblind person to describe the color red. They can't do it. He can't describe love because he can't feel it.
Exactly like she said, it's because Paris is incapable of feeling emotions. No guilt, no love, nothing. Moving on to number 6, we have Angela Simpson.
Right.
You murdered this man.
Yes.
You tortured him.
Of course.
This is an interview with killer Angela Simpson. She was arrested after torturing and killing a man in a wheelchair for snitching. During this interview, she tells exactly what happened, how she did it, and why. The scariest part is how forward she is about this all. She doesn't care that she's going to prison or that she killed someone.
You're not here to pretend to be remorseful.
Of course not. Why would I do that?
Are you remorseful?
Not at all.
She's not remorseful at all, and she's very open about everything.
To my house, walked him down the street. I don't know why the media acts like the motherfucker couldn't walk. He walked very well. Walked him upstairs, kicked his ass.
Like, imagine being okay with taking someone's life. This interview sends shivers down my spine just listening to her and watching the stillness in her body and the calmness in her voice. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Manuel Vela. In 2016, a 28-year-old man, Manuel Vela, was arrested after killing his girlfriend and their unborn baby. In this interview, you can tell that Manuel suffered from schizophrenia. He claims that the father told him to kill his girlfriend and her baby. Keep in mind, he is the father to her baby. And then he says that he is the Antichrist.
And that's where I cut her open, when he told me to.
Who told you to?
The father, it's just the same one who was to communicate with Jesus Christ is one he was here.
Although it seems like he is intoxicated during this interview, he is not. He's just experiencing hallucinations and delusions. In this interview, he also claims he would receive commands from outer space and extraterrestrials. A lot of people found this interview disturbing just because you can see how far gone Manuel is. He's no longer in control of himself. In our 4th spot, we have Arthur Shawcross. Arthur John Shawcross was an American serial killer in Rochester, New York that took the lives of 13 individuals. His first 2 murders were committed in 1972. He was caught for both and then sentenced to 25 years. But after serving 15 years, he was released on parole. That's when he continued on with the killings and took the lives of 11 different people. His interview is creepy for a number of reasons.
Do you remember killing her?
Yeah, possibly.
He gives me the chills. He's just twitching and his voice is just so unnerving. But it gets worse once he starts talking about his crimes.
How did you kill her?
Probably strangulation.
How do you know when they're dead?
How? I don't know, just do.
You can see that he won't admit it directly. He says maybe he killed her and maybe she died by strangulation. It gets worse.
Reach over my shoulder like this, right behind my neck, and I pull out a brand new machete. When she backed out, I come up behind her.
He's just a ruthless killer. In our third spot, we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an infamous serial killer who was responsible for murdering 30 women. Although it's thought that this number may be even higher. He would often kill these women in brutal ways. In his interviews, he shows no remorse for his actions, and the calm tone of his voice is very disturbing.
I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Throughout this whole interview, Bundy tries to gain sympathy from the interviewer and the audience. You can see how he's trying to manipulate your emotions, which is terrifying. A lot of people commented saying that Bundy is trying to act human in these interviews. He knows exactly what to say and how to say it to manipulate you.
It was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
It's a huge reason why he was so famous and had a huge media following. Moving on, at number 2, we have Beth Thomas. Beth Thomas was a young girl featured in a documentary titled The Child of Rage. At such a young age, Beth displayed psychopathic tendencies, including harming her brother on a number of occasions and trying to kill her parents. Her parents were terrified of her and her brother Jonathan's safety, as they should be. Take a look at our interview.
Why is your brother afraid of you?
Because I hurt him so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what, at nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
So on a number of occasions, Beth would go into her brother's room at night to try and kill him. On top of that, she used to steal knives from the kitchen to try and harm her family with.
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
That's not all. Here is her recounting the time she hurt Jonathan.
And what happened to your brother? Tell me about it.
His head hurt real bad, but his chin, he had to have stitches in it.
Now apparently doctors deemed that she acted this way as part of her traumatic past. Now it's said that after years of therapy, she is now a healthy adult. And in our number 1 spot, we have Jeffrey Dahmer.
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
Between 1878 to 1991, American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys. He would pack the victims' body parts into plastic bags and bury them behind his parents' home. He would also take disturbing photographs of his deceased victims and keep certain body parts as souvenirs. He also had tendencies to eat the victims. This gave him the name the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. Upon searching his home, police found albums full of pictures of body parts, and his place was filled with human remains. Before his death, Jeffrey had an interview with Inside Edition and other news channels. In these interviews, he shares gory details about the men he killed and why he did it.
One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him.
What's creepy is how calm he is talking about all this. Like he's murdered so many people and shows no remorse, just like all the other serial killers on this list.
I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore.
Hearing him say that he kept the dead with him as long as possible makes me sick. When police raided his house, they found heads were in the fridge and freezer. 2 skulls were on display in the house, and they found a 57-gallon drum filled with decomposing bodies in his room.